The first cut was the hardest. The shovel's steel edge screamed against the flint hidden just beneath the thin summer grass, sending a jarring shock up Ilara's arms. She was 17, and the inheritance left by her parents was not a sum of money, but this small, unforgiving patch of land and a cabin that rattled when the wind blew. Beside her, a scruffy dog with intelligent eyes and mismatched ears named Boro tilted his head, his tail giving a single uncertain thump against the dusty ground. He watched her reset her feet, bend her knees, and drive the shovel down again, this time finding purchase in the dense, clay-heavy soil. She grunted, leveraging a spadeful of earth and tossing it aside. One shovelful. The beginning of a hole. Boro padded over to the small mound, sniffed it with the gravity of a government inspector, and looked back at her as if to confirm that this was, in fact, the plan. Ilara offered a small, tired smile. It was the plan. She worked until the sun was a hot weight on the back of her neck, the hole growing wider and deeper with painstaking slowness. Her world had become a rhythm of metal on earth, the sigh of displaced soil, the ache in her lower back. By midday, a shadow had fallen over her work. She looked up to see Mr. Gable leaning on the split-rail fence that separated their properties. He was a man carved from old wood, his face a roadmap of harsh winters and disappointing harvests. He removed his straw hat and wiped his brow, though his expression was anything but warm. "What in heaven's name are you doing, girl?" he asked, his voice raspy with disapproval. Ilara paused, one hand resting on the shovel's handle. "Digging." He squinted, as if the simplicity of her answer was an insult. "Digging for what? Buried treasure left by your folks?" The question was a barb, a reminder of her sudden, solitary state. "A cellar," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Mister." Gable let out a short, dry laugh. "A cellar? Out here? The ground will flood it come spring and freeze it solid by January. What are you going to store in it? Icicles and mud?" "Firewood," she said, "and food." "You've got a woodshed. Your father built it himself, a good one." "The wood gets damp," Ilara stated simply. It was a fact, not a complaint. The driving snows of the last winter had proven it. "Everyone's wood gets damp," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "That's just the way of things. You put a roof over it, you hope for the best. You don't go digging a grave for your kindling. Wait until the first frost. That ground will be hard as iron. You're wasting the last good weeks of summer on a fool's errand." He shook his head, placing his hat back on. "Your father was a practical man. I don't know where you got such a fanciful notion." She didn't answer. She just watched him walk away, his back rigid with the certainty of his own experience. She turned back to the hole. Boro nudged his cool, wet nose into her hand. She was not wasting her time. The notion was not hers. It was her father's. That evening, with her muscles screaming and her hands raw, she lit a single candle in the cabin. She pulled a dusty, leather-bound journal from the small crate that held her parents' few possessions. Her father's handwriting filled the pages, neat and precise. He had been a stonemason before his heart gave out, a man who thought in lines and angles and the patient logic of geology. The journal was filled with his observations, diagrams of mortise and tenon joints, sketches of the local birds, and, in the last dozen pages, a detailed plan. It was titled, "The Earth Cellar, a study in thermal mass and dry storage." He had surveyed this very spot, noting the way the land sloped, the composition of the soil. He had designed a cellar dug into the hillside, with fieldstone walls and an arched roof, all sealed with a special lime mortar that could breathe, allowing moisture to escape outward but not penetrate inward. He wrote of ventilation shafts, of a drainage system using gravel and clay pipe, of a design that would maintain a constant temperature, cool in summer and, most importantly, above freezing and bone dry in winter. "The earth is a blanket," he had written. "You just have to know how to wrap it around you." He had never had the time or the strength to build it. Now, she did. The next morning, she walked the 4 miles to town. In her pocket was a small, worn leather pouch containing $23.17, the entirety of her worldly funds. Her father's journal had a list of materials. Most she could gather herself: stone from the creek, sand from the river bend, water from the well. But the lime, he had insisted, had to be high-quality, hydrated lime, and she needed a proper mason's trowel. At the general store, Mr. Henderson looked at her over his spectacles. "Lime? What's a young thing like you need with a 50-pound bag of lime?" "Mortar," she said. He quoted her a price that made her stomach clench. $12, more than half her money. She paid it without haggling. She found a used trowel in a barrel of old tools, its wooden handle smooth with the wear of another man's hand. Mr. Henderson let her have it for $1. Then she went to the freight depot and spoke to the foreman, a burly man with kind eyes. She needed clean sand, she explained, but couldn't afford to have it delivered. He pointed to a pile of spillage near the tracks. "Take what you can carry in your own bags, miss. It's no use to us." She spent the next hour filling 3 burlap sacks she'd brought, the rough fabric scratching her arms, until they were almost too heavy to lift. The cost was nothing but sweat. She paid a boy with a cart $1 to haul the lime and sand back to her property. When she arrived home, exhausted, she counted her money again. $18.17 spent, $5 remaining. She looked at the bag of lime, the sacks of sand, the dark, growing rectangle of earth she had carved out of the hillside. It would have to be enough. The work was a relentless beast. Each morning before dawn, she would take a wheelbarrow down to the creek that bordered her land. The water ran cold and clear over a bed of flat, sedimentary stones, worn smooth by 1,000,000 years of currents. Her father's journal specified stones no thicker than her hand, with at least one flat face. She waded into the icy water, her bare feet turning numb, and searched for the right shapes. She learned the heft and balance of each one, hoisting them into the wheelbarrow, her muscles straining. It took 4 trips to gather enough stone for a single day's work. The wheelbarrow's axle groaned in protest, and Boro would trot alongside her, occasionally stopping to bark at a squirrel, a small, furry guardian on her laborious pilgrimage. Back at the site, the hole was now a proper excavation, 6 feet deep, 12 feet long, and 8 feet wide. The walls were sheer and dark, smelling of damp earth and worms. Mr. Gable had stopped offering advice, now merely watching her from his porch with a look of grim pity, as if observing a slow, self-inflicted tragedy. Mrs. Finch, who lived down the road, made a special trip, her face etched with concern. "Child, you're getting as thin as a willow switch," she'd said, pressing a still warm loaf of bread into Alara's hands. "This is no work for a young girl all alone. You'll wear yourself to a nub before the first snow. What will you do then?" "I'll be finished by then," Alara replied, her voice rough with dust and fatigue. "And what if it collapses on you? What if you hurt yourself? Who would even know?" The questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. "I'm careful," Alara said. It was the only reassurance she could offer. She thanked Mrs. Finch for the bread, and the woman left, shaking her head slowly. The loneliness was a physical presence, as real as the stones she hauled. But it was not a crushing weight. The journal was her companion, her father's voice a quiet guide in her head. She mixed the mortar in a wooden trough, following his recipe precisely: 3 parts sand, 1 part lime, enough water to make a paste the consistency of thick porridge. It was different from the cement-based mortar everyone else used. It was softer, more forgiving, and, according to her father, alive. She laid the first course of stones against the earthen wall, pressing them into a thick bed of the pale mortar. The trowel felt clumsy in her hand at first, but soon its movements became an extension of her own intent. The scrape of steel on stone, the soft squish of the mortar, the satisfying tap to set a rock in place. It was a language, and she was slowly becoming fluent. Her hands, unaccustomed to the abrasive lime and rough stone, were a mess of scrapes and blisters. At night, she would wash them in cold water, wincing as the soap stung, and then rub them with tallow. She would fall into bed, too tired to dream, and wake with the sun, feeling as though she had been beaten. But every morning, she rose and returned to the wall, which was growing, inch by patient inch. One afternoon, a young man she recognized from town stopped on the road. He didn't call out from a distance like the others. He walked right up to the edge of the pit. He was tall and lean, with an open, curious face. His name was Leo. He worked at the mill. "I've seen you working out here for weeks," he said, his voice gentle, without a trace of mockery. "My pa said you were digging a root cellar." "Something like that," Ilara said, not pausing in her work. She buttered a stone with mortar and fitted it into a gap in the wall. "What kind of stone is that?" he asked, pointing. She was surprised by the question. No one had asked about the specifics. "Schist, mostly. Some granite from further up the creek." "And the mortar?" He seemed genuinely interested. "It's very white, not like the gray stuff my pa uses for patching the chimney." "It's lime-based," she explained, finding herself speaking more than she had in weeks. "It doesn't trap moisture. It lets the wall breathe." Leo nodded slowly, absorbing this. "Breathe," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "So the damp stays out." "That's the plan." He watched her for a long time, his silence comfortable, not judgmental. He didn't tell her she was wasting her time. He didn't warn her about the winter. He just watched, his expression one of quiet respect. Finally, he said, "It looks like good work." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Well, I'll let you get back to it." As he walked away, Ilara felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. It was the simple, profound relief of being seen. Not as a foolish girl or a pitiable orphan, but as a builder. The walls rose to meet the top of the excavation. Now came the hardest part, the roof. Her father's journal showed a shallow barrel vault, an arch of stone that would support the immense weight of the earth above it. Building it alone seemed impossible. The keystones would be heavy, and the physics were unforgiving. But her father had planned for this too. There were diagrams for a temporary wooden form, a curved scaffold she could build from scrap lumber. It took her a week, scrounging boards from the collapsed old shed behind the cabin, pulling nails and recutting them. She built the arched form inside the cellar, a skeleton of wood that would hold the stones in place until the mortar cured. Hoisting the heavy capstones into place was a battle of leverage and will. She used ropes and a long pry bar, inching the massive flat stones up a ramp of packed earth and onto the form. Her back felt like a single, solid knot of pain. One evening, a stone slipped, grazing her forearm and opening a long, shallow gash. She hissed in pain, dropping to her knees. Boro whined, licking at her face, his body trembling with concern. She sat there in the dirt for a long moment, the sight of her own blood making her feel dizzy and overwhelmingly alone. Tears welled, hot and sharp, but she forced them back. Crying wouldn't set the stone. She went inside, washed the wound as best she could, and wrapped it tightly with a strip of clean cloth. The next day, the arm was stiff and throbbing, but she went back to work, her movements more deliberate, more careful. Finally, the last keystone slid into place. The arch was complete. She stood back, looking at the perfect, self-supporting curve, and felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost brought her to her knees. It was beautiful. It was strong. It was hers. She spent 2 more weeks applying a thick coat of lime plaster to the entire interior, sealing every tiny gap. Then she dismantled the wooden form, piece by piece, holding her breath until the last support was removed and the stone arch held its own weight, silent and solid above her. The final task was to cover it. She shoveled the excavated earth back over the stone roof, creating a mound nearly 3 feet deep at its peak. She contoured it to blend with the hillside, and as her father's journal suggested, she transplanted sod from the far corner of the field onto the new earth. Within a week, the green had taken root. The cellar had disappeared, transformed into a gentle grassy hillock with a single sturdy wooden door set into its face. It was done. The first hint of the coming winter arrived not as snow, but as a change in the quality of the light. The sun, even at midday, seemed distant and pale. The wind, which had whispered through the summer aspens, now moaned through the bare branches of the oaks. Elara spent the crisp days of autumn in a fever of preparation. She had a good supply of wood, cut and seasoned over the summer, but now it had to be moved. She stacked half of it in the old woodshed, the pile reaching the rafters. The other half, the driest and best of the split oak and maple, she carried armload by armload into the cool, dark stillness of her new cellar. She stacked it carefully against the far wall, the logs fitting together like a puzzle. The air inside was cool and smelled of stone and earth, a clean, dry scent entirely different from the damp, musty odor of the cabin's crawlspace. Boro would follow her in, his claws making soft clicking sounds on the stone floor, and lie down with a contented sigh, as if he understood this was a place of safety. When she was finished, the cellar held nearly 2 cords of wood, a fortress of fuel. On the shelves she had built into the opposite wall, she placed her small store of provisions, sacks of potatoes and onions, jars of pickled beans from Mrs. Finch, and smoked hams she'd bartered for with a wandering hunter. It wasn't much, but it was secure. The first snow came in late November, a gentle dusting that melted by noon. A week later, a heavier fall blanketed the valley in 6 inches of white. Mr. Gable saw her coming from the cabin and shouted across the fence, his words puffing out as clouds in the frigid air. "Looks like winter's here. Hope you enjoy your frozen firewood." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound, and went back inside his sturdy farmhouse. Elara didn't reply. She went to her cellar, opened the thick wooden door, and was met not by a blast of cold, but by a pocket of still, calm air. A thermometer she'd hung inside read 41 degrees. The wood was cool to the touch, but completely, utterly dry. She gathered an armload and carried it back to the cabin. The logs caught fire with a satisfying crackle, burning hot and bright, with none of the hissing or sputtering of damp wood. The small cabin was filled with a steady, radiant warmth. Boro lay stretched out on the hearth, his coat gleaming in the firelight. Then the blizzard came. It did not arrive with the gentle grace of the earlier snows. It descended like a predator, a howling white fury that erased the world. The wind shrieked, a physical force that rattled the cabin's windows and drove snow into every crack and crevice. For 3 days, the world beyond her door was a churning vortex of white. The temperature plummeted to 10 below zero, then 20. Sounds were swallowed by the storm's roar. Time itself seemed to slow, measured only by the logs she added to the fire. Each trip to the cellar was a journey into an Arctic wasteland. She would tie a rope from the cabin's doorknob to the cellar's handle, a lifeline in the blinding chaos. The snow was waist-deep, then chest-deep, a thick, heavy powder that resisted every step. But each time she pulled open the cellar door, it was like stepping into another season. The roaring wind vanished, replaced by a profound silence. The air was still and dry. The thermometer held steady, never dipping below 40. The stones of the wall were not cold enough to steal her warmth. She would gather her wood, her breath pluming in the still air, and feel a deep sense of security that was more potent than any fire. The earth was a blanket. Her father had been right. She would place a hand on the cool, solid stone of the arch and whisper a thank you into the quiet dark. The storm raged for 4 days and 4 nights. On the 5th morning, Alara awoke to an unnerving silence. The wind had stopped. She opened the door to a world transformed, sculpted into alien shapes of white and blue. The snow was piled in massive drifts, some as high as the cabin's roof. The sun was brilliant on the pristine landscape, the light so bright it hurt her eyes. Her small cabin was a lone outpost in a sea of white. Her cellar was just a gentle curve under the snow, its door a dark rectangle she had to dig out. The wood inside remained perfect. Later that day, a figure appeared, struggling through a massive drift that had once been the road. It was Mr. Gable. He wasn't wearing his usual confident stride. He was hunched against the cold, his face pinched and gray. He stumbled to her door and knocked, his knuckles rapping weakly against the wood. When she opened it, he didn't meet her eyes. He looked past her, at the robust fire roaring in her hearth. His own breath came in ragged, frosty plumes. "The wood," he began, his voice a hoarse croak. "My shed, the drift collapsed the side. It's all buried. What I can get to is soaked through with melted snow. It won't burn, just smokes." He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, humbled exhaustion. "My wife, Martha, she's so cold." He swallowed hard, the pride that had defined him for so long, finally broken by the brutal reality of the cold. Could I buy some of your dry wood?" Ilara looked at the old man, shivering before her. She saw not the skeptic who had mocked her, but a neighbor in need. "I don't sell it," she said quietly. His face fell, the last bit of hope seeming to drain from him. He nodded, turning to leave. "But you can have some," she added. He stopped, turning back slowly. His expression was one of disbelief. She pulled on her coat and boots and led him, not to the old woodshed, but to the gentle mound of snow that was her cellar. She dug out the door and pulled it open. The sight that greeted him made him gasp. In the lantern light, the neat, towering stacks of bone-dry oak and maple stood like a treasure hoard. The air was still and dry. He reached out a trembling hand and touched a log, as if to confirm it was real. "How?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "It's a cellar," she said. She handed him a heavy canvas sling and helped him fill it. He didn't speak on the way back to her cabin. He just kept shaking his head, his eyes darting from the dry wood in his arms to the almost invisible hillock it had come from. He was the first, but not the last. The news of Alara's miraculous wood traveled on the cold, still air. The next day, Mrs. Finch arrived, her children huddled behind her, their faces blue with cold. Her situation was the same. Then came the miller, Leo's father, his voice stripped of its usual boom. Then others, families she barely knew, their own supplies of fuel proving inadequate against the unprecedented cold and wet. To each of them, she said the same thing. She would not sell the wood, but they could have what they needed. She led them one by one to the cellar, and each time their reaction was the same. Stunned silence, followed by whispered questions. How was this possible? A few days later, the crisis deepened. A tremendous crack echoed across the valley as the immense weight of snow on the roof of the Tanner family's cabin caused their main beam to split. The roof sagged inward, showering the interior with snow and splintered wood. They had nowhere to go. Without hesitation, Ilara took them in. Her small cabin became a refuge, crowded but warm. The men took turns sleeping on the floor, the women and children sharing her bed. In the evenings, the cabin was filled with the low murmur of voices. They were all there. Mr. Gable, Mrs. Finch, the Tanners, Leo and his father. The air was thick with the smell of drying wool and hot tea. One night, Mr. Gable, holding a steaming mug in his calloused hands, looked directly at Ilara. The firelight played across his weathered face, revealing the deep lines of humility that had replaced his old skepticism. "I was wrong," he said, his voice clear and steady, meant for everyone to hear. "I watched you all summer, digging in that dirt, and I thought, that girl is chasing a ghost. I told anyone who would listen." He shook his head. "That cellar of yours, that's the craziest, most brilliant thing I've ever seen." He looked at the Tanners, huddled by the fire. "And it saved us. Your stubbornness, it saved us." Mrs. Finch nodded, her eyes wet with tears. "He's right, Ilara. We're sorry for doubting you. We were fools." Leo, who had been quietly observing from a corner, caught her eye. He didn't say anything, but his look of profound admiration was more eloquent than any speech. He had never doubted. He had only been curious. Now he was a believer. They didn't just want her wood anymore. They wanted her knowledge. "How did you know?" the miller asked. "How did you build it?" Ilara didn't give a speech. She simply retrieved her father's journal. She opened it on the small wooden table, its pages filled with his neat script and precise drawings. She explained the principles as he had written them. The breathing lime mortar that wicked moisture away. The thermal mass of the earth that insulated from the extreme cold. The importance of the ventilation shafts she had hidden on the far side of the hill. She shared it all. The knowledge was not hers to hoard. It was a legacy, and it was meant to be passed on. She was just the first to build the proof. Years passed. The valley changed. The harsh winter served as a brutal, effective teacher. The following spring, Mr. Gable, with Leo and his father, came to Ilara, not with apologies, but with questions. They held a copy of her father's journal she had painstakingly transcribed for them. They were digging a cellar of their own, next to the main barn, a communal one large enough for 3 families. Ilara spent weeks with them, not directing but advising, showing them how to select the stones, how to get the mortar mix just right, how to build the arch form. She was no longer the strange, solitary girl. She was an expert, a source of quiet wisdom. More cellars followed. Small, grassy hillocks began to appear on homesteads throughout the valley, each one a testament to an idea that had once been dismissed as a fool's errand. They became a signature of the region, a symbol of resilience and shared knowledge. The winters still came, harsh and unforgiving, but the community was prepared. No family ever went cold again. Ilara and Leo built a life together, a quiet partnership founded on mutual respect. They expanded the small cabin, adding rooms with the same care and precision Ilara had used in the cellar. They had children who grew up playing on the soft, grassy slope of the first earth cellar, rolling down its sides in the summer sun, never knowing the desperation from which it had been born. Boro grew old. His mismatched ears drooped, his muzzle turned a distinguished gray, and his intelligent eyes grew cloudy. He spent his days sleeping by the fire, the same fire he had guarded as a young pup. One autumn evening, he rested his head in Alara's lap and went to sleep, his breathing growing shallow and then stopping altogether. His death was a quiet passage, peaceful and dignified. Alara and Leo buried him on the crest of the hill overlooking the house, in a spot where he had loved to sit and watch the sunset. They placed a simple, flat fieldstone over the grave, with no inscription. The stone itself was enough. Decades flowed by like water in the creek. Alara became the old woman of the valley. Her hair as white as the first snow, her hands gnarled but still strong. Her face, like Mr. Gable's before her, became a map of the seasons she had weathered. Young couples, new to the valley, would come to her for advice, not just on cellars, but on mending fences, on setting bones, on when to plant and when to harvest. She gave her knowledge freely, just as she had given her firewood so long ago. Her voice remained quiet, her sentences short and certain. She never boasted. She never had to. The landscape was her testimony. She died in her 92nd year, in the same bed she had been born in, with Leo, himself an old man, holding her hand. It was a peaceful end to a long, purposeful life. The entire valley turned out for her funeral. They buried her on the hill next to Boro, under a sky the color of slate. The community she had saved and nurtured placed a stone next to his, a piece of granite carved by the great-grandson of the miller. The epitaph was not her name, but a line they had found in the original copy of her father's journal, which she had kept all her life. It read, "The earth protects what is built with patience." Long after the names of the people were forgotten, the structure remained. The original cellar, the first of its kind, became a part of the land itself. Moss grew thick on its stone doorway, and wildflowers bloomed on its grassy roof. It looked less like something that had been built and more like something that had grown there, a natural feature of the enduring landscape. It stood as a silent, humble monument, not to a single person, but to the profound power of a quiet idea, a pair of stubborn hands, and the simple, unshakable belief that even in the harshest of winters, there is a way to stay warm and dry. It was a testament to the girl who had been thrown out by circumstance at 17, who had spent $18 and all of her will, and in doing so, had built a legacy of warmth for generations to come. The cellar endured, its cool, dry interior, a perpetual whisper of her name. It was her home. It would work. It had.